we'll get to our next speaker. This is Rémy Friedmann. He is responsible for the roundtable assessment in Thailand and Myanmar at the Swiss Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he knows what COVID-19 means for these countries, for the national action plan process in those countries. And he'll give you an overview of Switzerland's commitment to human rights and exactly the new challenges with regard to COVID-19. Rémy Friedmann, please, the floor is yours. Now
many thanks. I'm so glad to be able to be with all of you. Many thanks for the invitation. Many thanks for the organizers for this very efficient, solution to the challenge that we have now in COVID-19 times. I would have liked to go to Zurich as a field trip here in Switzerland, but I'm still happy to do this from home. So it's good that we had these two presentations before. I hope you will feel some continuity, and I'll be able to build on what has been said so far. So my presentation will be on Switzerland's commitment to human rights and new challenges with regard to COVID-19. So in terms of COVID-19, we have some new challenges, as you can see here. And we have some challenges that may be old, but impacted maybe also by what's happening right now. And as part of our continuous commitment to human rights that continues unabated in front of new challenges and relatively old ones, we make this true in different ways. We are also collaborating with cartoonists like Chapat, who was recently in a panel with Swiss President Sommaruga at the UN on the freedom of press, which is particularly challenged this time. So this is one of our priorities. The defense and promotion of human rights is anchored in our constitution and goes along with Switzerland's commitment to peace and stability worldwide. So it's not only a commitment to human rights, but we need a stable environment, and we continue to be committed to peace. And this continues unabated, and since many issues have been somehow highlighted or enhanced by the current crisis, this commitment needs to be stronger and stronger. And one of the elements which is very important is that our belief that promoting the economy and promoting human rights is fully coherent and is actually constituting those two sides of the same coin. So this is why there shouldn't be a conflict between promoting human rights and the economy. And this is particularly true also in the area of tourism. So among our top priorities in foreign policy and human rights, apart from the freedom of expression, which includes also freedom of the press and business human rights that has been mentioned, well, torture figures very high there, death penalty, protecting human rights defenders, addressing women's rights and equality, economic, social, and cultural rights. We've heard about business human rights. This is very high on the political agenda. Direct democracy, as you've seen in this weekend, is working here in Switzerland. Next topic on the agenda will be the initiative that was mentioned before. But as part of our commitment to business and human rights, the Swiss government has helped developing a number of tools addressing the issues that are salient in this area, trying to respond to severe situations. You see here the picture of the Rana Plaza incident. There are initiatives coming from the private sector, for example, on responsible cotton supply. We work in the framework of the UN Guiding Principle on Business Human Rights, of the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises. And we've been working with different sectors, with the textile sector, with the commodity trade sector, and as you know, with the Roundtable on Human Rights and Tourism and the tourism sector. So all these elements are high on the agenda. And as mentioned before, Switzerland has developed a national action plan on business human rights in 2016 that contained 50 measures. This plan, following broad consultation, has been revised before the beginning of this year, and it was adopted by the Swiss Federal Council in January, with 35 political instruments to promote human rights due diligence by businesses, to promote accountability and transparency, improve political coherence, so promotion of investment, but also promotion of human rights, improve access to remedy, but also working a lot with our Swiss representations abroad, reinforcing their expertise and working with them to work with businesses. So to advise, for example, companies investing in environments where human rights risks are high. And one of the elements and one of the examples is that as part of these smart MIC or non-legally binding measures and some legal measures, I mean, the plan doesn't create new measures, but reflects the current legislative system. We have measure 8 that looks at human rights in tourism, and that's where we have this support that was mentioned on the human rights impact assessment tool that was developed last year with a focus on Thailand and Myanmar. Now in the follow-up, what we'll be doing, and you will hear it from the next presentation, we'll be also working among us with our embassies, both in Thailand and Myanmar. So what does the Swiss Federal Council do with the National Action Plan? We are actually, the Federal Council is expressing its expectation that businesses operating in and from Switzerland respect human rights wherever they operate, in particular where these human rights are particularly at risk, where they have to carry out enhanced human rights due diligence. So companies need to really ensure that their operations do not have adverse human rights impact. And that's why we are working more and more, and we have been working for a number of years with sectors that have a particular importance for the Swiss economy. I mentioned the commodity trade sector, well, tourism, of course, but also pharmaceutic, also sport. We are very active in sport and human rights, and that a number of international sports federations are based in Switzerland. This process actually to work on sport has led to the creation of a Center for Sport and Human Rights based in Geneva. And all of this is actually coherent with what's in the UN guiding principles, because enterprises can have an impact through their own activities. They can contribute to abuses through their activities, but also through their business relationship, through their supply chains. And this is what is being addressed in the tools, in what we have actually developed for small and medium-sized enterprises in Switzerland, to which we have reached out through tools that are now being disseminated also more broadly, also trying to work with our embassies abroad. So here you have the schematic process of human rights due diligence, which is in UN guiding principles of doing policy statement, integrating human rights due diligence into the management systems, identifying impacts, trying to develop measures to seize, prevent, mitigate, track the results, communicate the results. Well, the human rights has been highly affected. Human rights have been highly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been a major issue for a major challenge for all states. And Switzerland has recalled its commitment and the necessity to be even more vigilant about human rights. And it has done so in different fora, reminding all states that measures that are being taken in the context of the COVID-19 crisis need to respect the principles of legality, necessity. It needs to be proportional and non-discriminatory. It needs to be limited in time, comply with international human rights obligations of states, and needs to be paying particular attention to the protection of particularly vulnerable persons. One of the examples of our commitment is that at the General Assembly that opened last week, Switzerland had joined forces with a number of governments to issue a General Assembly resolution for global solidarity in the fight against the COVID-19 disease. This has been actually co-signed by most of the states of this world and adopted by consensus. So this should be an action that needs to be propagated as an expression of the unity of the community of states and the need to really cooperate internationally. We've seen that solidarity is sometimes also being put at risk in these difficult times, also among states, between states. So we have developed as the Swiss government a number of very concrete, also operational activities in order to respond to the crisis. For example, setting up a rapid response instrument from the beginning, from the actually early times of the crisis, or 1 million Swiss francs to develop operational activities, for example, supporting selected projects to prevent human rights violation, particularly in connection with the COVID-19. And the number of statements also that have been developed and actually issued in different fora to remind the necessity for a global commitment on human rights in these difficult times. So we have, again, reiterated that measures need not to be used to justify abusive behavior, restricting rights to freedom of expression and association, and that people are actually defending those rights and need to be able to carry out their work freely. Some of the main challenges, as you've seen, maybe also in the first cartoon that you've seen in this presentation, are linked to disinformation. Disinformation very often online, which sometimes risk undermining the authorities' efforts to combat the spread of COVID-19. So it's important that facts are being checked, that they're being assessed, that people have access to information that is based on facts, and that responses are as quick, as reliable as possible. Help must be provided without discrimination, especially to those who are mostly vulnerable, people in displaced camps. You've seen the situation in Lesbos, in Greece, people who are detained, people who have pre-existing health conditions. So this is a moment where we need to really take care of the most vulnerable, and this is particularly true also in the tourism sector. So in order to build back better, there needs to be coordination with the involvement of the private sector. Switzerland has been also working on business and human rights, trying really to discuss with think tanks, with other partners we are working with, also to see how we can address some of the inequalities that have been highlighted by the current pandemic. In some sectors, there is a lack of a social net, there is a need of a social contract, like for example in the garment sector in South Asia. Answers need to be conflict sensitive. There needs to be a do no harm approach also by the private sector. Some examples of our activities: human rights defenders, which are particularly at risk, need to be protected also in these times, and knowing that there are some temptations also to impose more authoritative measures and sometimes suppress dissent. There is a risk of human rights defenders being detained, and that's where they are most exposed also to the risk of contracting the virus. And that's where also our representations have been quite active in terms of continuing to follow these cases based on the existing guidelines. We are continuing to work with different companies that may have an impact really on the ground, for example, extractive companies, private security companies, as part of multi-stakeholder initiatives such as the Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights, or the International Code of Conduct Association for Private Security Service Providers. And last but not least, one of the examples is that we have been starting now, and this is what you'll hear about in the next presentation, the supporting actually with focused right, with the Roundtable Human Rights in Tourism, the dissemination of the human rights impact assessment tool with a focus on tourism resumption in Thailand and Myanmar, looking at the challenges for human rights due diligence in times of COVID-19. So these are, this is actually the end of my presentation, and I would like to thank you, and I'm open to any questions and reconnect with you whenever possible. I'm looking forward to the next presentations and the rest of the day. Thank you.